Hello everyone, and welcome to ISPE's May 1st Friday webinar, Engineering Licenses and Business Development Goals, Maintaining Total Compliance, presented by Christian Herring. My name is Katie and I will be your moderator today. The handouts for this presentation are available in the handout section of your webinar toolbar and on the website. The quiz can be found on the website. A direct link to both is included in your confirmation email. Be sure to complete your quiz by next Wednesday to ensure timely delivery of your PDH certificate. All attendees have been muted to avoid audio feedback. If you have a question, please type it in the question box and Christian will read it aloud at the end of the presentation. With that, I will go ahead and hand it over to Christian.
Okay, thank you, Katie, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to attend today. We're going to be discussing certainly all the details as it relates to the industry, specifically information that'll be helpful for architecture, engineering, and construction firms. And again, I'd like to thank you for joining today. And essentially, we're going to get down into some detail regarding license requirements, again, for architects, engineers, surveyors, and contractors. As Katie said, and I appreciate the introduction, my name is Christian Herring. I am an account executive at Harbor Compliance. And the focus of today will be sharing strategies that will help your firm compete in essentially what we see today out there in the industry, a mobile, connected, 24/7, 365-day-a-year business environment, while navigating a regulatory environment that isn't quite built for mobility or speed. And at Harbor Compliance, our mission is to help businesses like yours achieve total compliance in the fewest steps, with the least effort, at the lowest long-term cost. To do that, we manage a full range of government requirements associated with forming, operating, and growing a business or nonprofit nationwide. Everything from corporate filings and tax registrations to certainly what's relevant to your industries, professional licensure, and potentially operating permits. To give you a little bit of perspective in terms of how we operate, we work with businesses in every state and over 25 countries abroad. Right now on your screen, you'll see a few of the businesses we help keep compliant. My role as an account executive is first to be an educator on regulatory requirements facing businesses like yours. I also do act as a facilitator for companies and clients looking to become compliant and engage with us, including CPAs, attorneys, and really working on behalf of their clients who require this type of licensing and compliance solution related support. Today, I'll be providing an overview of how license requirements impact architecture, engineering, and construction companies at critical milestones in their growth and development. So I'll be paying special attention to the most common pitfalls that companies suffer, and I'll also provide strategies to help you avoid them. All in all, I know we have some scheduled time together today. The way it's going to break down, this presentation will run about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll have a 10 to 15-minute Q&A period. So again, questions that do pop up along the way, if you would kindly just send them in via chat. We'll ultimately just address what we can within the time that we have, as well as the questions that'll benefit the larger audience. And anything after the fact, you'll have my contact information if you'd like to follow up with me directly if we don't touch on your questions specifically. So when we talk about licensure, and architects and engineers, certainly everything in your regulated professions, you tend to think in terms of the individual professional license that you hold as that PE or as that architect. In fact, many practitioners are unaware of the license requirements that apply to their business at the company or firm level. The focus of the presentation today is on those company licenses or certificates of authorization, as they're commonly referred to. We'll be looking at ways that the individual licenses interact with the company licenses, but the path to individual licensure is not a part of this presentation today. However, if you do need any information on that subject, just contact me and I'll be happy to help out. Companies often approach us after they've encountered a problem with a state license. Sometimes they've run out of time and patience trying to get a license approved in a tough jurisdiction. For example, an engineering firm approached us after their administrative employee had submitted an application in Illinois 5 times. Now, when that license was finally approved, that employee could not find it in the state's website. And of course, by then she was understandably frustrated and had sunk quite a bit of time into this licensing process. Now, sometimes the pain can actually go deeper than just simply wasted time and frustration. One regional contracting company missed out on a $1 million bid in the state of California because the contractor license came in 1 week after the bidding window closed. And a general contractor's license, just to give you some perspective on that, in California costs $480. When you think about that, it's tough to lose out on a $1 million opportunity over a $480 license, but that scenario is actually very common in regulated industries like construction, engineering, architecture, and particularly for larger, rapidly growing businesses. We also hear from companies that have been disciplined for practicing without a license. In many cases, the company was working to maintain active licensing, but the business simply grew faster than their licensing staff could keep pace with. Happens all the time. So let's take a look at that math, because where there is pain, there's opportunity. And in this case, there is a lot of potential for both. So when that $480 license unlocks $1 million in opportunities, the way you manage that $480 investment clearly has an enormous potential impact on your company's profitability, for better or for worse. Similarly, if a week's delay in getting that license can cost you $1 million in opportunities, timing is critical as well. By the end of this session, you'll have the strategies and tools you need to turn this licensing math to your company's advantage. For those of you who are just joining us, we've been talking about why company level licensing is so important for engineering, architecture, construction firms. And now we're about to dive into the specific requirements and processes involved in licensing. So basically, businesses in regulated industries, certainly like yourselves in engineering, there's 3 layers of requirements to manage. First, you have general corporate filings with the Secretary of State and other state agencies like the Department of Revenue, for example. These are required for all businesses to maintain good standing with the state. Second, we have the company or firm license or certificate of authorization in most cases when you're speaking with the board, which are generally granted by the state professional boards based on your discipline. Now, they authorize your company to provide the regulated services, but beyond that, of course, as you all know, there are the individual licenses that are required to practice a particular discipline within your industry. We'll take a look at how these layers of requirements interact with each phase of the corporate life cycle. The first layer of regulation is maintaining good standing in your home state, a process that starts with forming the entity, whether it's incorporating or forming an LLC. Appointing a registered agent to receive legal documents for your company is also a part of that process. Registering for taxes would be the next step. These would typically be your corporate income taxes, payroll taxes, sales tax. Then at that point, your business is formed in the home state, and then you would look to the ongoing steps. Each year, your company must maintain its good standing by renewing your registered agent service, filing annual reports with the Secretary of State, and filing annual tax documents. Since the deadlines for these documents vary, it's important to track the due dates carefully. In addition, you must notify the Secretary of State whenever information included in your registration changes. In addition to corporate filings with the Secretary of State, your company also must apply for a license called a Certificate of Authorization, or a COA, from your state professional license board, where required. This slide shows the number of states that require COAs for each industry, or each discipline in this case. You can see there's a lot of variation here. Now, for the purposes of simplicity, District of Columbia has been factored as a state here when you look at these numbers. These company license requirements are in addition to the general business licensing and permits that may also be needed to operate in a given jurisdiction. We'll take a closer look now at the requirements for each of these different disciplines. Individual architects must be licensed in all 50 states plus DC. Additionally, 29 states require architecture firms to apply for the certificate of authorization through their state licensing boards. These states are marked in light blue. You'll also note there are 5 states marked in dark blue on the map. They don't issue the COAs, but they do have requirements such as registration or potentially other prerequisites in the form of informational filings. In some of those states, the process can be just as complex and time consuming as the board certificate of authorization application. In New York, for example, design firms must submit an application to the State Board of Architecture under the New York State Department of Education, or NYSED. If approved, NYSED provides documents that the firm then submits to the Secretary of State. Once that filing is approved, a certified copy of the Secretary of State filing must be sent back to the NYSED to complete the process. Now, if one requirement is missed along the way, the state will simply send the paperwork back and you get to start all over again. Doesn't that sound fun? It is worth noting that something as small as leaving the periods out of a PC for professional corporation designation anywhere on that application or the associated materials is grounds for that application being rejected. The average state filing fee for an architecture firm license or certificate of authorization is approximately $195. And with most states charging in the neighborhood of $100, total state fees to register an architecture firm nationwide would come to about $3,880. I'm going to transition into the similar version of this, but for the engineering discipline. Similarly, engineers must also be licensed to practice in all 50 states as well as DC. Now, there are 37 states today where firms are required to apply to the State Board of Engineering for that same certificate of authorization. 5 additional states do impose requirements such as registration, name approval, or other records to be filed. In California, for example, firms must file an organization record following precise specifications, and every engineering branch office must also be registered under ownership of an engineer in responsible charge, which for some firms winds up being more complex than many state certificate of authorization filings. There's also currently pending legislation to require firm licensure in DC that could occur as soon as the 1st of July. That has not been definitively formed or stated yet. All in all, 42 states impose some form of license or registration requirement on engineering firms as it stands today. The average state filing fee for an engineering firm license is about $135, with most states approximately in that $100 range. State fees, just to give you a sense of what it looks like to just take care of this on a nationwide basis, state fees generally total roughly about $5,300 on average for all the state fees to process that certificate of authorization. As far as the land surveying discipline, you can see the same trends can continue here. Consistent message across the board. Like the other disciplines, land surveyors also must be registered in all 50 states. 36 of those are requiring the certificate of authorization to practice, while 4 more require other filings. Massachusetts, for example, does not license surveyor firms, but most entities need to get a certificate of approval from the licensing board and submit it to the Secretary of State with their entity formation documents. In many states, firms can combine engineering and land surveying services under one COA, provided that the services are provided by licensed professionals and supervised by a licensed professional in responsible charge. Illinois and New York offer design firm licenses that can cover architecture, land surveying, professional engineering, and structural engineering. In Alabama, however, firms must apply for separate licenses for engineering and land surveying. The average state licensing fee for land surveying firms is about $130 per license, processing fee with the state. State fees to license a firm for land surveying nationwide, just approximately $4,700 on average. So very, very similar to what we just discussed for engineering. We can segue into landscape architecture. As key contributors to the built environment, landscape architects must be licensed to practice in 47 states, so not quite the full 50 like we've seen previously. In the remainder, use of the title is just restricted to licensed professionals. At the firm level, 26 states require a landscape architecture COA, and 4 more, Massachusetts, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Tennessee, impose other requirements. In Nevada, landscape architecture firms do not need a license, but must have a resident architect in responsible charge of services for every branch location within the state. Fees for landscape architecture firm licenses range from about $10 to $500, with the average state fee for landscape architecture firms being about $140, most common in that $100 area. And to give you a sense of what that nationwide registration looks like, those state fees would total about $3,400 in this case. Requirements for contractors vary by state, county, and municipality, as well as by job value and specialty of the trade. 34 states plus DC require firms to obtain a contracting license, while other states simply have contractors register their firm with the board. In 3 additional states, licenses are issued at the county level, shown, excuse me, and 13 more that are issued at county and city levels, which you can see here in the dark blue. General contractors may need to apply for more than one license classification, as many states offer separate licenses for residential and commercial contracting, as well as engineering and building contracting. In some states, these are regulated by entirely different boards. Contractors may also need to apply for multiple licenses in some states at the state, city, and county or municipality level. Although general contracting licenses allow a firm to perform work across most trades, contractors wanting to take on a project that requires only one trade may need a specialty contracting license for that particular trade. For example, if a project requires only electrical work, a firm with a general contracting license may need an electrical contractor license before even getting started. Separate licenses may be required for electrical contractor, mechanical contractor, plumbing contractors, gas fitting contractors, and elevator contractors. The order of the licensing process varies significantly by state, but most states require applicants to go ahead and submit a license application, have a qualifying party pass exams, and submit background checks before a license is issued. Due to the complexity of the licensing process in this domain, generalizations about fees are not as meaningful as we've discussed with the previous disciplines here, but state fees for general contractor typically range from about $40 to $760, roughly about a $225 fee structure on average. Whenever company licenses are needed, they usually require appointment of a licensed professional who is responsible for services provided by the company. In some cases, you may need to appoint qualifying professionals for each business location or license specialty. We'll talk more about qualifying professionals later in the presentation. The types of projects or services that require a company to license differ by industry, location, and activity, but there is one relatively constant factor through all states and professions. And that's where professional licenses are required. They must usually be in place before offering services, submitting bids or proposals, or practicing. Offering services includes referencing protected services or job titles such as engineer or architect on business cards, letterheads, resumes, websites, LinkedIn profiles, and other social media. Before you submit a proposal, put up a company website or even assemble that LinkedIn profile. You want to be sure that any required licenses are in place. Once you satisfy the requirements for your home state, the professional board issues a license allowing you to offer and provide services. Most company licenses must be reviewed, generally every 1 to 2 years. In addition, like the Secretary of State, the state professional board must be notified of any relevant changes in your company's information within a specified period of time. In some cases, this is as short as 10 days. Opening or closing branch offices, changes in ownership or management, name changes or amendments, and changes in qualifying staff are examples of information that should be reported promptly to the license authorities. That covers the basic aspects of licensing in your home state. Now, when you expand into new states, you need to manage the same layers of licensing at new levels of complexity. In each new state, you must register with the Secretary of State to do business as an out-of-state or foreign company. You'll generally need to submit a certificate of good standing from your home state as a part of this application. Your company was originally set up according to regulations in your home state, so you may find that you need to make some fundamental changes to qualify as a foreign entity. You may need to revise founding documents such as articles of incorporation or board resolutions to meet specific state requirements. You may also need to meet particular name requirements beyond ensuring that your name is available. A lot of states have words that require approval from specific boards in order for you to use them. Many states require entity-specific endings, such as PC for a professional corporation. In addition, states have varying rules concerning corporate structure. Alaska and California, for instance, don't permit professional limited liability corporations or PLLCs. West Virginia does not admit professional corporations. Management and ownership requirements also vary by state. In Ohio, for example, licensed design professionals must own at least 50% of design firms, while in Georgia, all stockholders in an engineering PC, as well as one board member and the president, must be licensed engineers. Because of these requirements, companies frequently find that they must adjust their name, ownership, or management structure, or potentially even form a new entity when entering a new state. Remember a little further back when we said the timing is key? Secretary of State offices vary widely in their administrative preferences and timing. In some states, registrations may be approved within a day through an online system, while in other states, the process can take as long as 6 weeks. Some jurisdictions require online filing, while others are paper only. And some, although it's 2018, faxing has still proven to be the fastest. Some states also offer expedited filing for a fee, which may or may not benefit you depending on your plans. And some jurisdictions, calling is the fastest way to resolve an issue, while in others it's highly ineffective. The biggest way to speed applications through to gain licensure is to know all you can about a new jurisdiction. If you make any errors or miss any steps in an application, it will be rejected and you'll need to resubmit it. It is not uncommon for applications to be submitted multiple times without success. In fact, in some states, roughly half of the initial Secretary of State applications are rejected. Given the complexity of the licensing process, it's not surprising that regulatory staff do sometimes make mistakes. When that happens, you may need to step in and intervene with the state authorities. For example, we had once submitted an engineering firm license application or COA application to a state licensing board, and the state initially identified the license as an architecture firm license, despite the fact that they did not employ a single architect within their firm. Our in-house compliance specialist had called. They had the issue corrected after speaking with the board, and the engineering certificate of authorization was approved that same day. As another example, we were working to help a client foreign qualify an electrical contractor in Florida. The client's name was not available in that state. So the company had to file under a forced assumed name. A state official in Florida insisted that our client had to file license applications for both entities. So some duplication of cost potentially. One of our specialists had to intervene to explain that unlike a DBA or doing business as, the forced assumed name was not a separate identity. We built the case on the client's behalf, and their initial application was quickly approved. Sometimes when you know you've done everything correctly, down to the last period, dot I's, cross T's, you just have to step in and be an advocate for your company in just taking it across the finish line for what you're filing for and trying to accomplish. In addition to the Secretary of State filings, you'll need to satisfy any company license requirements through the state professional board in each state you enter. As a part of the application process, you'll generally need to provide a certificate of good standing from your home state, as we previously stated. Now we're going to look more closely at the steps involved in the license process and some of the pitfalls companies encounter when expanding into new states. Generally, company licensing follows the Secretary of State registration, but in some cases, firms must receive approval from the state licensing board before registering with the Secretary of State. And as we noted earlier, contractors are often required to receive prior approval from the state licensing board before even taking exams or filing with the Secretary of State. Since each state board has a unique company licensing requirement and a set process for completing the various steps, it's critically important to review Secretary of State and licensing board requirements side by side before beginning any of the paperwork. As you'll recall, with every state where you must apply for a certificate of authorization, you will usually have to appoint qualifying licensed professionals who are responsible for your services. In some cases, your qualifiers must be licensed within that state, while in others, out-of-state licensees may suffice. Wherever qualifying professionals are in place, their licenses are the foundation of the company license. Therefore, if you lose a qualifying professional, you must usually appoint a replacement and notify the licensing board within that specific time frame. And again, as we had discussed, that window can be short, in some cases as little as 10 days. Failing to promptly report any of these changes in qualifying staff may lead to automatic suspension or forfeiture of the company's license. In our experience, this is a major cause of inadvertent, unlicensed activity, particularly for large and growing companies. You also need to update the Secretary of State of any changes in the qualifying professionals. The more locations and states you manage, the more important it is to have a foolproof system in place to track the individual licenses of your qualifiers. Branch offices are another area that can commonly cause license problems for companies. Generally, office locations must be recorded with the state, and in some cases, they must be individually registered. You may also need to appoint a qualifying professional for every office based on state requirements. When working in multiple states, it's important to ensure that your branch office registrations align with state requirements where a project is located. Here's an example where a regional geotechnical firm was licensed with its principal place of business in Boca Raton, Florida. The company also had active licenses in South Carolina and Texas. And back in March of 2016, an engineer from the firm's Austin office had applied for a temporary permit to practice in South Carolina, tied to a project that had been awarded the year before. This application indicated that services would be performed by engineers in the company's Greenville, South Carolina office, but went ahead and listed the Austin office, which was not registered with the board as the branch offering the engineering services. The firm later registered the Austin office, but did receive a reprimand for unlicensed practice and a $500 fine. We had previously talked about timing for Secretary of State filings, and it is even more of an issue with company licensing, dealing with the professional boards. Company license applications are generally approved at meetings of the state licensing boards, which may occur monthly or quarterly or at varying intervals. Depending on where your application lands in that meeting cycle can greatly affect your timeline, meaning weeks or months of waiting before the board even gets the chance to review your application. Turnaround typically can range from 4 to 8 weeks, but it can take from 3 to 5 months in some jurisdictions. New York, for example, is currently running about 12 to 16 weeks for approvals right now. To have licenses in place when you need them, keep the board's meeting schedule in mind as you plan, and build ample time for review and approval into your schedule and project planning. Most company licenses must be renewed every 1 to 2 years. Be sure to renew licenses on time, as a lapsed license puts the company at risk of unlicensed practice every day that it is inactive and generally costs more to reinstate. For example, a Washington State engineering firm license with 4 or more engineers costs $150. A reinstatement for the same firm costs $900. A reinstatement in Georgia of an expired individual engineering license can cost about $1,000, whereas a renewal only costs $50. Most licenses renew annually or biennially following the company's initial license date, while others are due on a fixed date. For a given industry across states, you're looking at dates spread throughout the entire year. In most cases, larger companies will have due dates coming up every week. Tracking all of that can be challenging, to say the least. Given that the deadlines are all over the map, it is best to have an automated system in place to remind your licensing staff of deadlines in time to prepare your renewals. Or for the individuals out there that are managing your own, any way that you can just have some controls in place and some automated reminders well in advance is always a best practice. As you all know, most regulated industries require continuing education to maintain an active professional license. Failure to complete required continuing education is a major cause of license citations and penalties for individual professionals. Since these continuing education hours take time to complete, a professional who falls behind may have no choice but to allow the license to lapse, or worse, sign off on hours that weren't completed. We did recently have a new client who came to us who had to do 10 hours of continuing education in one weekend, and in my opinion, that's just a terrible way to have to spend your weekend. So just plan accordingly. Again, proactive reminders well in advance. Don't put yourself in that position. By including continuing education hours in your license tracking system, you can help your staff maintain active licensure, which will then reduce risk to your company licenses. Another common source of license gaps in busy companies is staff turnover in the license department. Since these departments are generally small, in many cases involving just 1 or 2 key staffers, a departure can derail a company's entire license program. I get calls like this all the time. It happens more than you would ever believe. That knowledge base is very well kept with some of these folks, and you just don't find people off the street that can walk into a company and understand how to navigate all the complexity with these state agencies. That said, to limit your risk, make sure that licensing resources, systems, and knowledge are shared among several employees. Create some redundancy. Store information in a centralized location and automate as many of the tasks as you can. Dedicated compliance software is best, But where that is not available, spreadsheets or calendar reminder systems are a step in the right direction. Now that we've looked at company licensing procedures and some common pitfalls and strategies, I'd like to point out some tactics that can help you leverage that licensing math to even greater advantage. When I touched earlier and noted that licenses represent opportunities, you need to examine your licensing efforts and consider not just the present footprint of your business, but your clients' footprints and where you would like to be in the next few years. Are there jurisdictions where licensing would open up significant opportunities with your existing clients? Once you've identified prime jurisdictions, you can license proactively to take full advantage of the opportunities you identify. By positioning your company to support your clients across their operations, you can enhance client relationships and build revenues. Licensing can also open up new opportunities through your allied services. For example, one of our engineering firm clients realized that with a very small upfront investment, they could license the firm for land surveying services nationwide. This allowed them to build out services for existing customers and bring in new leads as well. The licenses cost a fraction of what the firm was able to realize in new revenues with the ability now to offer nationwide land surveying services. While it's important to license your company for growth, it's also important to manage licensing where you are no longer active. If you finish a major project in a state where you don't see immediate opportunities there, it is important to either properly close down your presence in the state or maintain it. Sometimes companies are tempted to just walk away, but that is by far the most costly and problematic option. As we noted earlier, the reinstatement fee for a single license can cost up to 20 times as much as that license or renewal. If you leave a state without meeting your tax obligations, closing your tax accounts, and terminating the corporate registration in the state, you're left with states that are going to expect your organization to file every year and will be assessing penalties if you don't. Those penalties and fees will keep accruing until you properly close it down, at which point you'll have to do all those back filings and pay all those back penalties. And if you think you'll never go back, we've seen it happen time and time again where companies have a big opportunity come down the road that was completely unexpected in a state where their licenses ended up being delinquent. They've had to go back and submit the back due filings, pay substantial penalties, and that process to regain good standing of your licenses can be very time consuming and can actually prevent you from being able to realize that business opportunity, that unexpected opportunity. Professional licensure isn't just a best practice, it's the law. Practicing without professional licenses where required is a misdemeanor in most states. Penalties can range anywhere from $100 to $5,000 per offense, and each day of unlicensed activity may be considered a separate offense. Boards may also levy administrative fees on top of penalties. For example, in October of 2017, a Hawaiian pool plastering company that had operated without a license received a penalty of $47,680 plus $41,300 in fees. State and local governments are actively enforcing these license requirements. To give you an idea, Florida, for example, in the time span from July to December of last year alone, the Division of Business and Professional Regulation conducted 415 sweeps, received 825 calls to its unlicensed activity hotline, and received 174 complaints via its mobile app. In New York City, engaging in any trade where a license is required without the license is subject to penalties of $100 per violation per day. Licenses may also be suspended or revoked, and in more serious cases, criminal sanctions may be levied against companies that engage in unlicensed practice. If additional violations are incurred during a probation period, the company may be permanently barred from working in that state. This can, of course, affect growth exponentially over the life of the company and can even affect the business valuation for sale. Actions taken by any state board generally must be reported to other jurisdictions where this company is licensed. Failure to report discipline to other jurisdictions is a separate offense, often carrying harsher discipline than the original infraction. Once reported, discipline tends to have a ripple effect, unfortunately, and many boards have the power to impose reciprocal discipline. When a license is suspended or revoked in one state, others will frequently follow suit. Discipline is also a matter of public record, and many boards go as far as publishing citations in their newsletters and even on their websites. These violations usually stay on the record perpetually, so the reputation damage from even a single citation can be widespread and lasting. Finally, in some states, practicing without a license may forfeit your legal right to enforce your contracts and collect payment for services. This is from the California State Contractors Board website, and I quote, "Consumers are not legally required to pay a person who is not state licensed and cannot be sued for non-payment," end quote. There are a number of states where courts essentially enforce the requirements of licensing agencies and secretaries of state by preventing companies from accessing their court system. So imagine now trying to go forward and file a lawsuit against a client for non-payment, and the court rejects your ability to file simply because your license lapsed. I'd like to close now with just a quick recap of some of the best practices we've identified today and give you just a quick overview in terms of how Harbor Compliance specializes in helping engineers and firms with aspects of licensing. We can go ahead and address some questions. Include licensing as an early step in sales and growth plans. As we've seen, a license can take weeks and even months to receive board approval. Research new jurisdictions of interest early in your planning process. Examine Secretary of State and Licensing Board requirements side by side before beginning any filings. Pay special attention to requirements concerning company name, structure, branch locations, ownership, management, and professional engineer licenses. Use appropriate software to track all professional and company licenses throughout your entire operation. Set up automated notices of renewal dates and other important deadlines, as well as any changes in key staff or locations. Take steps to ensure continuity, even if someone who handles your licensing leaves. Finally, spread the word about your compliance to demonstrate your company's reliability and ethics to both partners and clients. Harbor Compliance can help you with any aspect of business licensing, or better yet, take the entire job off your plate. Our engineering and architecture firm clients and licensed individuals enjoy unlimited access to our cloud-based, dedicated compliance software for effortless oversight and direct access to a team of compliance specialists whenever you have questions, as well as a strong, compliant foundation for future success. I'd encourage anyone interested in learning more about partnering with us to contact me directly after the presentation. So that about wraps everything up from my side. I'd be happy to jump into some Q&A as we've received some questions from the attendees today. Right now on the screen, my email address and phone number are there. Feel free to write that down. If there's anything you'd like just to question me on offline, should needs come up further on down the road, please feel free to reach out. There's a lot of tremendous information that you can find on our website that's relevant to your industry, but of course, if it's something you'd just like to talk to someone, I'm happy to provide any helpful information I can. And of course, if I cannot answer any question, I will get with our in-house specialists who certainly can do so. So now I'll go ahead and cover some of the questions. Some of you have been chatting them, I believe, as we've gone throughout. So I'm just going to take a quick moment, want to look at what we have, and my objective is certainly, just in the sake of time, to answer what's going to be most relevant to the broader audience today. And then, of course, please feel free to follow up offline if I do not get to your question.
And Joe, I just wanted to make a quick remark. For those of you who are interested in submitting a question, please submit your question to the question box and we will review it. If you want to go ahead with the first question.
Absolutely. Question is there a way for a DBE engineering firm with its only office in Illinois to become registered as a DBE firm and expand into Indiana? It's a great question. The short answer is yes, there is a way to do that. We would need to just really get into some specific dialogue with you just to understand the structure of what you have in place as far as the DBE, understand how you've structured the entity in your home state, and then of course, following suit with everything that we've addressed throughout this presentation, getting that roadmap, looking at the requirements side by side, and precisely going with the optimal order of operations in terms of how we would do that. To get in any further detail, we would want to just understand more particulars. Feel free to contact me after the presentation, and we'd be happy to work with you, at least in just providing further detail.
All right, thank you. It looks like that's the only question we have as of right now. I do have a closing remark I'd like to make, but do you have anything you'd like to add?
I would simply add, and thank you for the opportunity, there is a tremendous amount of information by industry, by discipline that you can find on our website through our industry section or our information section. We are happy to take calls, listen to any specific instances that you're dealing with. If you trend I see out there in the industry right now, or a lot of firms are looking at moving to ESOP type structure, and that does pose some complexities as it relates to any existing licensure, and certainly how you would position your firm going into any new jurisdictions with expansion. We can help with that. We can certainly help with those types of one-off projects or specific requirements, but again, in general, you will find anything that you need as an individual or for firm-based requirements on our website, and if you need any specific direction or guidance, I would be happy to help.
It looks like a couple more questions did come in, if you'd like to review those.
Sure, let's see. Okay, so I believe, let's see, great question here. I'm going to read this out loud. Is there a design firm licensing requirement or registration in Indiana? And in this case, the question is geared for a foreign entity, so a firm that is, the home state is not Indiana. Also giving some additional detail that they have a satellite office that is unstaffed, but is used when in the area. Doesn't need to be registered separately. The state of Indiana does, and it's new legislation this year, if you're already in the state, you are fine. If you're moving into the state, there's some specific entity requirements. It sounds as if in this scenario, you already have this foreign qualification, and if I'm correct with that, you would be compliant. If you are not foreign qualified, please do reach out to me. I can give you specifics in terms of what the state's looking for. But today there's not a board requirement. It's more or less just how you structure things with the entity on the front end with the Secretary of State. We can talk more specifically there. Great question. Next question here is if a PE is a freelance professional or a private practitioner, is having that PE license alone sufficient for providing services, or would that person have to register as an engineering firm with an employee or staff count of 1, depending on the state where the services are being provided? In this case, if you are not operating, if this is just a sole proprietorship, just a singular business that you're running on your own and you're not operating under a legal entity, there would be no trigger for the firm registration. You would just want to be compliant with your individual license. Getting into any entity formation needs, that's going to be based on some specifics that are unique to what you're trying to do and how you're going to operate the business. Would recommend you just talk to an accountant or a tax advisor in terms of how you may want to structure things just to potentially mitigate against any liability. But based on this scenario, without an entity, you will not trigger those requirements.
All right. I believe that is all the questions we have for today, but I would like to remind everyone that a link to the handouts and the quiz can be found on the website. Be sure to complete your quiz by next Wednesday to ensure timely delivery of your PDH certificate. And we'd also like to thank Christian for his wonderful presentation and all of you for joining us today, and we hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.